is your face going to show up in a history book 50 years from now talking about the atrocities that you sat by and let happen, the policies that you should have affected and didn't, right? The things that you should have stood up for and ignored. Your face is going to show up in somebody's history book. And the question you have to ask yourself is it going to show up in a negative light or a positive light?
Welcome back to Evolving Your Workplace. I'm Carol Schultz. We want to use today's episode to get insight into a topic that has made headlines many times in the past few months for unfortunate reasons, and that's DEI. Many large companies have recently cut DEI programs due to pressure from outside groups. So some of this is not an exhaustive list, but companies rating in DEI and related programs: Amazon, Boeing, Brown-Forman, which makes Jack Daniels, Caterpillar, Ford, Harley Davidson, John Deere, Lowe's, Molson Coors, McDonald's. I could go on. There are many, many, many more. In addition, our president is attempting to eliminate it completely within the federal government. If you lead a company of any size or are curious to learn more about DEI from an expert, this one is from you. Today, I'm joined by Stacey Gordon, expert executive advisor and founder of Rework Work, where she coaches and counsels executive leaders on DEI strategies. Stacey, thanks for taking the time to talk today, and tell me a little bit more about what you do day to day and what inspired you to found Rework Work.
So what inspired me was I actually worked as a recruiter. So I have talent acquisition background, worked in recruiting for many years, and was just frankly disgusted by the way that companies recruited. Mm-hmm. And at first I thought, oh, it's the people, right? The candidates, they're not prepared. They don't have the right expertise. They don't have, right? I start going down the list of all the faults and the flaws. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a book about that. And then I realized it was not the candidates, it's the companies. The policies are terrible. I worked within one of the largest banks in the world in their recruiting function. And had the opportunity to really see how the sausage was made. And we all know what happens when we see behind the curtain. We just kind of want to vomit into a bucket off to the side. And that's pretty much what caused me to really get into DEI specifically, because when I worked in talent acquisition, I was always focused, right, on making sure that we had opportunities for all. And I always say, our goal is to make work for all, not just the people that we like.
Right.
So that is how I, ended up in this era where I realized that, we have to look at the policies, we have to look at the practices, and not just in talent acquisition, but throughout all of the organization.
Yeah, that's really great. And, coming from where I was, which was a nearly 3-decade career as a professional headhunter, I saw a lot of this, and which is what, had me pivot my business as well, right? And it never, it's really never the candidate. It's always the company, and it's how they recruit. It's how they determine what they're looking for and so on. And, I started back in 1992, and, I would assert that 98% of the people I worked with were white men, and it was great as things went along and things started to change, but there's still a whole lot of catching up we have to do. This is obviously a very complex subject, and there's so much to get into, but let's start here. When and for what purpose were DEI programs implemented widely, would you say?
I mean, that in even of itself is a tough question to answer, because I would first have to agree with everyone listening as to what DEI is.
Yeah.
So there are lots of programs that have been implemented over the decades, right? Do we consider affirmative action programs to be DEI, right? Do we consider workplace accommodations for breastfeeding mothers to be DEI? Do we consider Americans with Disabilities Act? Is that DEI? So your guess is as good as mine. I mean, to me, all of those things are DEI. So we've been putting that into place for years. There are many people at work today who would not be there if it wasn't for some form of DEI.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I actually had not ever, really thought about it, right? So the Disabilities Act, of course, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion right there, right? And, unfortunately, we are now living in a world with a administration that, is canceling DEI because they just think that, it's all about giving people, less qualified people jobs, which is not, in fact, what DEI is.
It is the stupidest thing
Yeah.
and the most ignorant thing
Yeah.
and racist to be,
Yeah.
I mean, racist, sexist, like let's call it what it is. We
Mm-hmm.
want to say, oh, that's not what they mean when they say that. It's absolutely what
Yeah.
they mean when they say it. And if we keep backsliding and pussyfooting around and tiptoeing around the elephant in the room, we're going to have to keep having these conversations over and over again. So what I'm not going to do is sit here and, defend any of the ignorance. It
Yeah.
is plain and simple what it is.
Yeah.
So with that being the case, it's like we have to say, well, then what is it? Because how we got to this idea that hiring people of color or women or people with disabilities is somehow we are taking unqualified people and shoving them into a job simply because of the color of the skin or the fact that they have a vagina. Like, that is the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah.
But yet, we don't say that when we talk about legacy hires,
Yeah.
right? We don't say that when we talk about nepotism. There's a reason the phrase Nepo baby is running rampant, right? Oh, that seems to be okay.
Yeah.
But somehow these people who get put into these roles who have no qualifications whatsoever, it's okay because, oh, that's my son.
Yeah.
That's my cousin. That's my friend's brother.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, I completely agree. And, it's interesting because when I listen to, I read many different sources of news, right? Because I think the only way to get close to a truth or what is so is to read as many different sources as you can of reliable news, right? Not just
Absolutely.
some, schmuck on the internet who has an opinion. And I look at, and I don't want to get too off topic here, but it makes me think of people in this country don't actually realize we have a caste system here, but we do. It may not be as bad as what you see in India with the Dalits, for example, that are the
Oh, it's
lowest
as
of the
bad. It's
Indian.
just not as blatant.
Well, and yeah, that's an interesting comment about that, right? So, I mean, we can take a look at our new administration and look at everyone who's being appointed to a role, with the exception of Kash Patel. Every single person that's been appointed to something has been a white male. Because let's not forget, Matt Gaetz was in the running before Pam Bondi was.
Well,
and I'm thinking, this is just the caste system at work.
well,
Lloyd Austin. We
I
both
would
listened.
I would actually differ on that a little bit. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is, but we also have to understand that that's not the purpose, right?
Right.
So we are getting a little off topic here, but I'll just say this, right? It's not the purpose. The conversation that we're having, and people are very frustrated, and rightfully so, that people are being put into positions that do not have the requisite qualifications
Correct.
for it, right? That is happening. And this is white men who are being put into these roles that do not have the qualifications
Correct.
for it.
Yeah.
Now, then everyone turns around and says, well, I don't understand. Why would he do that? We need to make sure that we're putting in qualified people. He is not putting qualified people. And I say our administration is not putting in qualified people for the very purpose that they don't care if they have the qualifications. What they actually want to be able to do is ensure they have yes men in those roles. They are just filling bodies, right?
Yeah.
They're just filling seats. So it's not about qualifications. They are just looking for yes men. So it doesn't make sense to try to have a logical conversation about qualifications as it relates to appointees, because that's not the purpose.
Right. Right.
And so we're going to go in circles.
Yeah. Are there any myths that you hear about DEI you'd like to clear up? I think we've kind of hovered over that already, but let's talk about that specifically.
Well, I mean, the biggest one is this idea that anyone who is hired sort of under DEI, or is a DEI hire. And if you're not following me on LinkedIn, you should be, because I do a newsletter where I specifically talk about DEI hires and what that looks like and explain that. And I think there is this myth that, let's just look at me. In case you haven't noticed, I'm Black. And I'm a woman, right?
Mhm.
Oh, I got double dings here.
That's right. Two strikes against you right there.
Yeah. And technically I'm an immigrant as well, because I was actually born in London. So,
Mhm.
but London's okay. So it makes me an okay immigrant, right? I'm not one
Mhm.
of the other immigrants, right? So I kind of get a pass on that.
Yeah.
But when we put yourself into these situations, if you look at me and say, okay, well, here we are, Stacey, are you in your role, right? Because you're Black? And the answer is no, of course not. Do you see the degrees behind me on my wall?
Mhm.
Right? Every person who wants to come at me and try to condemn me or try to say that I only got into whatever job that I have had over the years because, because I'm Black and not because I'm qualified, I
Mhm.
ask them, do you at least have as many degrees on your wall as I do before you actually make that condemnation? And the
Right.
answer for most people is no.
Right.
So how dare you tell somebody that they are a DEI hire when they are highly decorated, highly qualified, highly skilled, highly
Mhm.
experienced, and can run circles around you. But that is actually the problem, right? Is we
Mhm.
don't want competition because we don't want to open up, because we look at opportunity like pie. There's only so much pie. And if I give you a piece of the pie, then I'm going to go hungry. And that's not accurate either,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, and I think, and that's a great example. And another example is, Lloyd Austin with 40 years of military service running DOD, right? The Pentagon, stepping down. Did he make mistakes? Sure, everybody makes mistakes. But putting in somebody like Pete Hegseth, who really does not have qualifications to do the job,
Right. Zero
purely
qualification.
because he's a he's brown. He's a brown noser. He's a yes man.
And I think that's the question, but again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I can't even have that conversation because it's not going to be fruitful,
Yeah.
because again, they did not put that man into the position because they want him to be qualified. They put him into
Right.
that position because they want him to say yes.
Well, then how do you grapple with the fact that often companies are saying there's it's like this paradox between, well, we want everything to be a meritocracy. Don't you just see the irony there?
The problem with the
It's not a
meritocracy is
meritocracy,
most
actually.
people don't understand what a meritocracy is. So it's,
Correct.
again, we have a very, I mean, I hate to say this, but I'm going to have to call a spade a spade. We have a very ignorant group of people running our country.
Yeah.
We are laughable when it comes to
Yeah.
education in this country.
Hmm.
We have most people who can barely read at an 8th grade level, right?
Hmm.
I think it's like 50% of the country is at about a 5th grade level, and maybe my statistics are off, but they're bad, right? So if I misquoted, please don't come at me. You can go look up the statistics yourself,
Yeah.
right? But they're not good.
Yeah.
So the idea that we are living in a meritocracy, for many people who can't spell meritocracy
Hmm.
and can't define meritocracy, and then want to turn around and tell us that we need MEI instead of DEI.
Yeah.
It
It's
doesn't make any sense.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
I,
I think
I
we have to understand what a meritocracy is, right? A
correct.
meritocracy assumes that everybody is at the same starting point. A
Mhm.
meritocracy assumes that everyone has the exact same opportunity, the exact same resources, the exact same access to education, right? That is not the case. We can't have a meritocracy until those things are given, right?
Right.
Until we actually have equality across all of those things.
Hmm.
And because we have never had it in this country, we have never had a meritocracy in
Right.
the United States.
Right. I had a client when I was still doing search work. This is about probably 10, 11 years ago. They're, to this date, one of my most favorite clients I've ever worked with in my career. And the co-founder, who was the original founder, he brought in a co-founder and CEO because he was the CTO and he had no interest in managing people and he didn't have He didn't really have the qualifications to be a CEO like a professional CEO would. And I'll never forget, Joe said to me one day that, Carol, we're running a meritocracy over here. I don't care how long somebody's been with us. If they merit the raise, the promotion, whatever it is, they're going to get it. And they're going to get support from us to be successful at that. And, that was the very first time I ever had a client say that to me. 2014 or 15. I mean, really?
Right. And then the question is, well, is that even accurate? It's accurate for the people maybe who work there, but how are we even hiring people to get in the door in the first place? Right.
Well, I mean, they were hiring the right way because they were using me. So, but I think your point is taken for the general population of companies who don't know how to hire and how to recruit and how to write a position description and how to do, how to determine the competencies that are needed for a position. But again, separate subject, right? If we kind of get to the current place where we are regarding this attack on DEI, in your eyes, what do you think is happening? Like, what's driving this?
Racism. I mean, really? Again, I'm going to be 100% clear on what it is. There is what was the podcast, right, that we were talking about?
The one it was Jon Stewart's The Weekly Show.
Stewart. I was like, John somebody.
He had Chris Christie on this week, which is the first week of February.
Right.
For anybody who's listening to this down the road. Yeah.
Yes. And I think what I heard of all the things they said, one of the interesting comments was Chris Christie said, the public senses that there is unequal hiring going on, right? The public senses that, people of color are being hired and they're not qualified. How are you sensing? What is the sense that you got? You got a spidey sense? All of a sudden we're superheroes out here and we are under, no, seriously, right?
Yeah, I know.
And when you say you sense, you feel, that tells me all you're doing is you are working with bias. You are working with this sense of something for you don't like what's happening. And so you are putting your own perspective on that and then trying to treat it as though it's fact. There's no fact in that. The fact that the public senses, who's the public? What public? How many people are in this public? And what are you sensing exactly?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And because, I think of some of the work that I do and one of the exercises I do with clients is, they'll start to, and if we take your, thing, well, I'm sensing that this is happening. They'll tell me a story. And on one side of the sheet, I'll write the actual facts of what they're saying. Like, I was driving 60 miles an hour. That would be a fact, right? Versus I was driving really fast. That's more of the story about a fact because it's relative to who you're talking to, right? And on the other side, I write the story that people make up around the facts. And like a Venn diagram, those two things collapse on each other and that becomes somebody's truth. And that, what you're saying, how people say, well, I feel like this or I feel like that. That's not the truth. That's just the story they've made up around, where the facts and the story collapse on each other.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a tool that I use when I am working with clients, and it's called the ladder of inference. Mm-hmm. And it basically walks you through these steps and these mental leaps that we do, these mental gymnastics that happen. Like if you've ever been talking to somebody and they make a statement and you go, wait, how did you get there? I don't understand the mental leap that you took to get to this conclusion. The ladder of inference actually helps you go through all of the steps. I'm not going to do it here. Yeah. But that is, and what I teach is this, how you can interrupt each of those steps along the way to actually look at, like you said, fact. What was the fact in here versus the assumption that I made, the data that I took in around me, right? Even the data, even though we talk about eyewitness testimony, we already know eyewitness testimony is so faulty. Why? Sure. Because we all take in different types of data based upon who we are as people, right? So all of that is what happens when we then make an assumption and then we take that assumption and we then want to put it out there as fact. Mm-hmm. But we have to ask ourselves, was that a fact or was that an opinion, right? One of the things we talk about, like affinity bias, I talk a lot about unconscious bias
Yeah.
in the workplace. And especially in the recruitment space is where you see affinity bias so much because we want to hire people that look like us, that make us feel comfortable. And every time someone says, yeah, I felt really comfortable with her, I'm like, that's a trigger word for me, right? Every time you utter the word fit, that's a trigger word for me because I know you are operating off of, how you feel and you're not operating off of fact. I'm like, can we have facts over feelings?
Well, and that's the importance of when companies, I believe why companies need to bring in a third party from the outside that understands how to ask questions in order to create a particular position description, right? Because I'm not biased. I am completely unattached to who they hire. I'm only attached to, let's really look at the different things that you need. And there was never a time where when sitting down with a new client to put together in my kickoff meeting in my search process, where I wouldn't ask, more than one question where they'd say, that's a really good question. I never thought about that.
Right.
Right.
But it's also, even now we're talking about like the fact that you have to be able to understand competencies, right?
Correct.
What are the
That's right.
competencies that you need in a person in
right.
order to hire this person?
Mhm.
Most managers cannot answer that question.
Well,
They don't even know,
that's the point.
right? They
That's
have
all
no
part of this
idea.
process. Yeah.
And so to answer the earlier question, what is DEI? That's part of it. But it means we actually have to upskill. And most people are quite happy in their mediocrity. They are happy doing the bare minimum
Yeah.
and doing what they have always done because it has worked for them so far. And so,
Yeah.
now I come along and I say, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Hiring Manager. Actually, rather than going off of your gut feel and how you feel about this person, I need you to provide me with competencies. So now you have to actually do some work.
Mhm.
And you're frustrated with that. So rather than you do the work, you want to turn around and tell me that I am somehow doing something wrong and that I'm the problem, when really it is your lack of accountability for doing your job properly that is the problem.
What do you think are the dangers that, cutting these DEI programs are going to lead to?
Oh, I mean, oh gosh, the dangers are so vast, right? I mean, I, I don't want to be um, alarmist, right?
Mhm.
But what is happening right now is affecting work and affecting everything that we do for decades to come. Everyone says, oh, we just have to get through the next 4 years. No, not 4 years. We are going to be feeling this. Our children's children are going to be feeling the effects of what is happening right now.
Yeah.
It's not about 4 years. And this is why this is so dangerous, because the rollback of protections for people, the removal of rights for some people,
Mhm.
right? Like you were talking about the changing of policies, or at least the attempted changing of policies. All of these things are going to have so much impact, right, moving forward. So the danger, it's exponential, right? The danger that's out there. It really has to come down to, at some point, somebody is going to write the history books. And if you remember, there was a big outcry at some point. We didn't want to talk about critical race theory, and we didn't want to teach what was happening in
People
the
don't
50s
know
and the
critical
60s,
race
right? Nobody
actually
wanted to
is.
see
Yeah.
like those images of white people screaming in the faces of young students, right, who were being led into schools. Those were your grandparents, right? Those were your parents. Nobody wanted to see their face, their family in those books. And we have to think about moving forward. That's going to be today. Is your face going to show up in a history book 50 years from now, talking about the atrocities that you sat by and let happen,
Mhm.
the policies that you should have affected and didn't, right? The things that you should have stood up for and ignored.
Mhm.
Your face is going to show up in somebody's history book. And the question you have to ask yourself is it going to show up in a negative light or a positive light?
Yeah. What do you know about human rights campaign surveys?
The one that is done, yes, I know that
Because
there's
many of the companies I mentioned and many more that I didn't mention, one of the biggest things that those companies are doing, where I said where they're reining in DEI and related programs, this is one of the things that they're canceling is this human rights campaign survey.
right. And I think the reason for that, so let me just, again, I'm always going to be honest and transparent. I have never really liked those surveys, right? Not to say that what they're trying to do isn't good. But I think that what happens when you have a survey, and I'm not speaking about a specific survey,
Right.
I'm just saying in general, there are some surveys that are out there that are run by for-profit organizations. And you are pulling in people so that what really happens, it's like the Grammys, right? The Grammys just happened. And we realize, right, there's this recognition that people want. They want a Grammy. And I have to ask you, do you agree with the people that won a Grammy this year, right? Do you agree that Beyonce should have won a Grammy for, what was it, Country Album of the Year?
I don't know. I didn't watch the Grammys.
I think it was Country Album of the Year. And if I'm
which
wrong, look.
She won't win for the Country Music Awards.
Right. But my point is, though, do you agree, right? And then do you agree that, my own daughter is very upset that Billie Eilish didn't win a Grammy, right? So I bring this up because we have this system that is in place to create awards and hand them out to people, but the people have to decide, right? There's some people who sat in a room and decided who they thought was deserving. And so everyone's working to get those accolades. Now, there are lots of musicians who did not get an accolade. Does that make their work any less important? Does it make them any less worthy? Does it make their music any less interesting? No, it doesn't. Right. But they are working towards getting this Grammy because the Grammy is the pinnacle of my career, right? It's the same with these awards for DEI, right? You have to look at what are people doing. Some companies are doing really, really great work and they've never, ever submitted to one of those surveys. And some companies are not doing so great, but they've made sure to submit every single year. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of how many people have submitted, what are they doing, what are they measuring, who's doing the measuring, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, what I can tell you is as my career, progressed and, there weren't just a whole bunch of white guys, in tech. What I would say is I never had an occasion, never, for somebody to say to me, don't go find me XYZ. I had more than one occasion where people said, please find me a woman if you can. We have too many men around here. We'd love to, that's the diversity we need. Now, when somebody says to me, go find a woman, it is implied because especially people who knew me knew I wasn't just going to put an unqualified woman in front of them. Right?
Right.
And sometimes, the most qualified person would be the man or, whatever that might look like. And I think that, when I look at our federal government canceling DEI at a federal level, because, what was the first comment after that horrible wreck in DC last week?
Yeah, they tried to blame DEI. I don't know how you do that.
I was sickened by that. Sickened. And I don't know how anybody wouldn't be sickened by that. And, I look and I've never been an advocate for checking a box. And I think what people don't understand because of the divisiveness that's happening at the federal level and, even below, is what people don't understand about diversity is that diversity isn't about race necessarily. It's about culture. It's about where somebody grew up. It's about how somebody grew up. It's about education. It's about many different things.
Right.
And if you're too foolish to have a diverse organization, guess what's going to happen financially to your company? It is not going to grow nearly what it would because you're going to have groupthink.
I mean, the thing is, though, this isn't even a conversation that we even really need to have, right? I don't mean today, I just mean in general. Because what leader worth their salt has ever hired somebody who wasn't qualified for the job just because of the color of a person's skin? Now, I'm going to be honest, right? I will say I have seen, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I have seen men, right, who have hired women not because they were worried about qualifications,
Yeah.
but because they liked how she looked,
Well, that
right? They
happens all
wanted
the
eye
time.
candy in the office,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
If we did a whole season of Mad Men, right? Where
Right. I was just thinking that. Yes.
where that was an acceptable thing that was happening,
Sure.
right? So I think that we have to understand that at some point, though, a true business owner, a true leader, is at hiring people, no matter who they are or what they look like, to make sure that their business thrives.
Mhm.
And so if you were not doing that, right, it's like I don't know who isn't doing that. I've worked with so many recruiters over the years. I've never come across somebody who has said, "Oh yeah, let me take this person who has absolutely no idea what they're doing whatsoever and
And
place
just put
them
'em in front
into
of a
this
yeah.
role."
So that circles us back to what do you think's going on here?
As I
I mean,
said,
is it just blatant racism and wanting to keep the upper caste, wanting to keep the upper caste, as in white people, primarily
absolutely.
white men?
So if I challenge everyone to go and listen to Tim Wise's video. If you don't know who Tim Wise is, you should Google. You just look on, go to YouTube, type in Tim Wise, Tim, last name Wise, and he will pop up. He is a white man who has talked about race for the longest while. I've been following him for many, many years.
Mhm.
And if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I've posted his most recent, not his most recent, but a video I post all the time because it's only 3 minutes long. It is the shortest and it is the most succinct way to explain racism in
Yeah.
this country. And what he talks about is basically the fact that we, as for many people, maybe you don't know this, but white is not actually a race, right? We didn't have a white race.
Right.
It doesn't actually exist. It is a
Anyone,
made up construct,
right?
right?
Anyone who
So
has read Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste knows that, by
right,
the
like
way.
it is not a real thing.
Yeah.
So in the 1600s or so, right,
Yeah.
people became white
That is right.
because landowners wanted the poor white people who were much more aligned in their interests with the slaves
Mhm.
and indentured servants. And they were upset because they kept having rebellions, right? So to stop that, the landowners said, no, white people, you come on our side, and we're going to call you white. And now you can see that you actually belong with us. And they got these folks to actually go out and, basically be like their own little army on their behalf. So here we are, we have poor white people who have no land, no nothing, right? And they are fighting to preserve rich white landowners' property.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? Because they convinced them that at least they were better than Black people.
Yeah.
And that is
Yeah.
literally what we are dealing with today. You have poor white people who are very upset, as they should be, right? As of the conditions that they are living in. And
Right.
they see that there are people of color, women, right? There's all this conversation that's happening. And it's like, well, it seems to them, right? The public senses, if we use Chris Christie's language, the
Mhm.
public senses that Black people are doing better than them, that Mexicans are doing better than them,
Mhm.
that immigrants are coming to this country and are doing better than them.
Mhm.
So it is that old school mentality that is kicking in where they're going, wait, no, let's help preserve Elon Musk's wealth, right? And all the billionaires, we're going to help them because at least the Black people won't have it. At least
Mhm.
the Mexicans won't have it. We are literally dismantling this country because they'd rather see it burn than see other people successful in it. And
Boy.
that is the
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah. So, for leaders who are running small to mid-sized companies, let's get off that depressing topic. What advice do you have for them?
Stay the course.
In the SMB space in terms of DEI.
Stay the course,
Yeah,
right? Like we
I
have
would
to.
agree.
So for me, even I look at all the federal stuff that's going on. I'm like wanting to pull my hair out. And go, what do I do? But I have to remember that I can't necessarily affect that right now, right? Like that ship has sailed. Our opportunity to do something was when we were supposed to vote. And, it is what it is. So this is what we got. We've made this bed. You're going to have to lay in it and enjoy it.
Yeah. Well,
So,
sorry, go on.
no, it's just to say, so I think that we have to stay the course and understand that, yes, there's a lot of stuff happening up here, but does it actually impact you right now? If you were about to sign a contract, do a survey, a client, engagement survey with your organization, if you were about to hire, all those things can still happen, right? We still have to feed ourselves. We still have to clothe ourselves. We still have to do all these. We still need your services, your products. So those things still need to continue. Otherwise, we're going to have a complete breakdown in society. And so whatever you are doing, continue doing it, right? If you have not been doing DEI, start.
Well, and I think that, in this list of companies, these are all large companies, right? A lot of airlines were in there. I didn't mention Meta, Black & Decker, Apple's in there, Cisco, even Costco. But they're not necessarily canceling DEI programs. They're canceling the human rights campaign surveys, right?
Right.
And, when it comes to the SMB space, I think that, and even in large companies, because I've worked with large companies earlier in my career, I just choose not to, because I think there's too much work to be done there and they don't really want to change. But the smaller companies, I think they're by and large committed to a diverse workforce. Again,
I think they're committed to
because it makes
workforce,
them a more,
right?
It makes them a more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not voluminous, but
productive, successful.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things, of course.
Right.
It makes them more well-rounded. That's what I'm thinking of. So, and yes, and those well-rounded things do make the people more productive. They make them more successful. The more productive people are, the more money you're going to make, right? The happier people are, the more money you're going to make.
Right. I mean, I think we have to be in that space and just understand that it's not about, and it's never been about, oh, I need 2 Black people, a white person, a gay person.
I've never had
and
anybody say that to me, by the
way. Like, we're not doing that. That's never been the case. The case is, can I show up to work and not feel as though I'm going to be ostracized or nitpicked, right? Can I show up to work and just do my job? And so if I wear a hijab, right, can I still come to work and do that without being nitpicked? If we're going to do a work function, right, and I don't drink, can we have some non-alcoholic beverages so that I can feel included and I can show up, right? Can I come back to work as a mom who needs to pump and have a private place to do that so that I'm not doing it over a toilet in a restroom stall, right? Like, if I am a person with a disability, can I make it into my building? Right? Is there wheelchair access? Can I get in so that I can do my job? Am I going to have the right height desk so that I can do my job? Right? That's all we are doing is making sure that people can show up and actually do their best work so that your company will thrive.
Yeah. Wow. Is there anything we haven't talked about?
I mean, I think a lot of it is, and I get it. So many people, especially after George Floyd's murder, right, felt like they were pressured into doing something. And I jokingly said all through 2020, 2021, even 2022, I was like, there were 3 things people did. They hired a chief diversity officer, they started ERG groups, and they did unconscious bias training, right? That was the trifecta of what we did. And the thing is, though, unconscious bias training is just the first step. So I talk to people about the framework of we need to get to this place. You being in talent acquisition, you understand that we automatically exclude. It is so easy to be like, oh, not this resume. Nope, not this person. No, this person, right? And we just toss. We do it like that without even thinking. What we need to do is flip that and be able to include. My question is there any way this person can do this job? Is there any way that this person could be qualified? If there is, leave them in the process, right? Let's look at them. And so but going from understanding what unconscious bias is to all of a sudden being inclusive is not something that you can just snap your fingers and do. It's not something you can sit in a training and do. we have to practice it. So that's the thing that I'm telling people. If you really want to do something, you really want to figure this out, you do have to educate yourself. You do have to go through a process. We have a 4-step process that helps you to do that. And you might be like, oh, 4 whole steps. Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry that you're going to have to do a little bit of work, right? But this is professional development. This is education. This is what we are constantly doing, right? To keep ourselves moving forward and being better people in the workplace.
Thanks for watching Evolving Your Workplace. Do you have a topic you'd like to discuss? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to click subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes.